Hi, good evening. Today I would like to talk about what sets apart China from India in manufacturing. In this video, I will actually take up the views of some of the experts who have commented on this topic regarding the manufacturing capabilities of China and comparing the manufacturing capabilities of China with India. Firstly, I will take the reference point as somewhere after 1947, after 1945. 1947, India got independent. 1949, the Communist Party of China came into power in China. So, if you were to take this as a reference point and start the analysis, let me take the views of a professor at MIT called from the school from a particular college in MIT called the Sloan School of Management, and the name of this professor is Yashing Huang, and he's an expert in the field of Chinese economics, and according to him, what set apart China from India, the one aspect of what set apart China from India in manufacturing is education. According to him, the levels of rural education after India's independence was much lower than what it was in China after 1947. The, the years after 1949, after the Chinese Revolution had occurred and the Communist Party in China had come into power. There are some facts that will be used in this video to prove this fact. So if you were to take the reference point as 1950s, from 1950s, if one were to see what is the average years of education in India and compare it with China, you will get some insights into what he meant by saying that the levels of rural education, the levels of education in the rural parts of India was low. So after 1950s, the average years of education in India was 1 and that of China was 1.8. If you go a little bit more further, you to the late 1970s to early 1980s, this same number had gone up to 5.7 in China, whereas it was only 2.5 in India, 2.5 years in India. And if you were to go a little bit more further, and let me tell you one thing, in the late 1970s, the Chinese economy had opened up and liberalized under the premiership of a person called Deng Xiaoping, and if you were to compare the average levels of education in China at that time in the early 1980s was 5.7. Similarly, when India liberalized in 1991, the level was only 3.6. So China had gone ahead of India in the early 1980s itself, whereas India was still behind China in 3.6. Having said that, in 2007, India is only 1.5 years behind China when it comes to the number of average years of education, but the quality of education in India is much lower than what it is in China. So I've given you all these numbers just to emphasize the fact that what Yashing Huang had to say about Indian education. The levels of Indian education was low right after the time of independence. If you were to take that as the reference point, especially in the rural areas, it was really low. Now, what has education got to do with manufacturing? Let me tell you another aspect of China before actually jumping into this part. There is a peculiarity. A Chinese Communist Party came to power in 1949, and India was also a socialist country after 1947. So what that means, what was common between both the countries, was that there was emphasis on equality for all. And what that should have meant is the level of education, the education should have been imparted to all the people in the country. It was the case to some extent in China, but not the case in India. For that matter, for many of the socialist countries, that was the case where there was emphasis on education for all. And moreover, there was also an emphasis on education so that people understand the communist scriptures and communist literatures. And that is also a partial reason why China had imparted education to its citizens much aggressively than India. So coming back to the point, what does education have to do with manufacturing? Let me tell you an aspect about China. After 1980s, when the new premier after Mao Zedong was Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese economy had liberalized, it has opened up to the world, and it has started conducting business with the world. And at this time, there was large-scale encouragement to small-scale businesses in the rural areas of China. Cheap credit was provided. The business environment was made much easier and much conducive to businesses. And what this meant was that these rural areas were able to develop certain products which they specialized in. For example, door handles would be produced by one village, screws completely taken over by another village, apples by a third village, and so on. So there was this emphasis on small scale micro medium enterprises that was given right after Chinese had liberalized under the premiership of Deng Xiaoping. But for this to be a success, to ensure that these small enterprises in the rural areas, let me tell you another thing. These small enterprises formed certain clusters, small clusters, and they were called town and village enterprises, TVEs. So they were a successful model because ultimately the goods produced by these rural enterprises were successfully exported to ensure there was economic growth in the Chinese economy. Just a second. So basically, what does this have to do once again with education? So without having the knowledge of numeracy and literacy, it is very difficult to carry out even a small business in the rural areas. And according to Yashing Yuan, the levels of education in India was very low in the rural areas compared to what it was in China, and therefore even the village enterprises probably did not come up, or the small scale micro enterprises did not come up after the independence or in the late 1980s, like what happened in India, what happened in China. So there are some reasons why education could not take off despite being a socialist country, despite there being emphasis on equality for all. One reason that was proposed is that the caste system in India ensured that the upper caste did not encourage the people of the lower caste to educate themselves. They did not find it their job or their responsibility to ensure that the lower caste would get educated. I don't know how far this argument is true, but this is one of the arguments. The second argument is, even if the caste system did not ensure that, the political leadership of India should have, especially when it comes to education and health. But then, right after independence, when it comes to primary education, the political leadership had completely failed in India. There are reasons why. There are also some reasons that are given as to why the political leadership did not emphasize on education, the primary education, the numeracy part, the literacy part that was required to carry out the small business, and carry out those businesses and successfully. And one reason is that the people themselves did not demand the education, because the people themselves did not feel the need to have high education. And the need was probably felt after India liberalized and there were more jobs that were created after 1991 when there was a need for education. So probably it's possible that the people of India before 1991 were kind of indifferent to education and did not find a need to impart education into their population. So So these are some of the reasons why education, the primary education, did not take off in India. Even though the enrollment level at the present times is very high, the quality of education is not proper. I'll come up with the facts about the quality of education probably in another video, not in this video. And now I would like to move forward and talk about other factors that could have set apart China in manufacturing compared to India. The other factor, which will be glaringly visible when I give you a certain fact about decentralization, is got to do with attraction given to the firms by the local governments. Now let me tell you what I mean by this. Firstly, the public spending, the allocation of public spending in China for given to the local government is 51%. Now compare that number with India. In India, it's only 3%. So what has this got to do with economic growth and improving manufacturing? So firstly, let me tell you one thing, that when it comes to China, because of large-scale decentralization of economic power to the local governments, like to the municipalities, like to the cities, like to the villages. It could be the urban local governments or it could be the rural local governments. Because of centralization of economic power, they were able to attract a lot of firms into their small regions and into their small jurisdictions. So basically how this worked was that, for example, let us take a municipality. There is a mayor in that municipality. The Chinese government would probably give a target, or the province would give a target, or the local government itself would have a certain target of economic growth they have to achieve in a particular year. And if the mayor is successful in bringing about that growth, he gets an opportunity to move up the ranks in the Communist Party of China. So the mayor has an incentive, and he also has a particular small jurisdiction within which he could bring some growth. Not only that, this has little to do with how the firms get attracted to these municipalities or the local governments. How these firms got attracted was that there were certain favored firms that these mayors or the deputy mayors in a city helped. And I'll tell you how they helped these favored firms. It is not like they allowed any kind of firm to come in. It's not like they encouraged competition between the firms. So there were some favored firms that the mayors had encouraged, and there were reasons why that they had done that. And the first reason is that there were some regulations that these firms had to abide by, and not the favored firms in general, the businesses that would want to come to a municipality or a local government region or the jurisdiction of the local government region would have to abide by some regulations, the business regulations. What these mayors have done in each of their municipality was just relax the regulations to some of the favored firms. In return, what does the mayor get in return? The mayor gets probably a stake in the company that they had favored, a stake in the company for probably himself or to the city itself, or he could get some monetary benefits from the company. So there was an incentive to bring about these firms, the favored firms, and keep favoring them. And when it comes to regulation, not only the mayors or the local officials had helped the firms to get by these regulations, the local officials also ensured that the people above them, their superiors, would also find ways to reduce the regulations on these firms. Or in other words, these local governments the local officials would lobby their higher officials to ensure that the regulations are relaxed or done away with for these favored firms. So I'm not telling this. There's a person from the University of Chicago. He's a professor of economics called Chang Tai-si, and it's his analysis that about Chinese economy that I'm talking about here. Initially, I talked about the analysis of Yashing Huang, a professor at MIT Sloan School of Management, and here it is from economics professor from University of Chicago. And moreover, the Chinese also there was an ease of doing business ranking that used to be released. I don't know whether it's released now or not, but in that China used to rank low, 91%, 91st rank in one of the years, probably in 2006. And what that meant was that it was not easy for businesses to come into China. There were a lot of regulations, there were a lot of formalities that the businesses had to abide by, and the mayors, in the centralized regions, in the local bodies, local governments, or the local officials found a way around it by ensuring that only the favored firms get certain benefits, and they also have something in it for themselves. Now, the same professor of economics visited a city in China in 2013. Chang Tai-si, the professor of economics, and he would describe what it meant by favoring certain firms. He gives an example. For example, there was a joint venture of General Motors in that particular city that he visited, and one of the favors that the official would give this company was all the taxis in that city would be that of GM Motors. So that's the level of favor that would be provided. And when it comes to economic growth, I told you that these mayors were given a certain fixed target to bring out about fixed economic growth per annum. And in the same city, this same professor would also see that in that city there were 7 deputy mayors, and each of these mayors would get an allocation of 30 companies that they would attract to take care of these 30 companies and also to ensure the welfare of the existing companies in that city. So what this also meant was, I told you that there was this benefit that the mayors would get in return for the service they were giving to the favored companies. One benefit was a monetary benefit. So even this monetary benefit was not a major contributor to, it was not the ends for the particular mayor, and it was kind of lubricant to carry out economic growth, but not an end in itself. And to emphasize this point, I have another point about this. The level of benefits, the amount of monetary benefits that a mayor gets is also not so high, because there would be a number of other mayors in the municipalities or in the villages or in the other local governing bodies who would compete for those firms. And because they would compete for those firms, the monetary benefits they would demand would be less because of this competition among the mayors. So corruption was not exactly the main motivator for a person to ensure that only 4 favored firms got in. There was this cronyism, but it was ensured somehow that the level of cronyism was not so excessive. So basically, this competition between the small municipalities, decentralized units, ensured that there was no excessive cronyism, excessive corruption. The final end was to achieve that fixed amount of growth that they have set themselves. To emphasize the point on the competition between the local bodies, there was this person, the former bureau chief of the Financial Times, called Richard McGregor. And he would give out a certain quote saying that if one were to visit the the country and go around the country, what one could conspicuous what is conspicuous is that uh, there was this competition among the local bodies uh, to ensure among the villages, among the provinces, among the municipalities, among the counties, or whatever. That's quite visible, and it is to ensure that they gulp down as much economic advantage as possible. And this he called it as a kind of Darwinism, an internal competition within these decentralized units. So this is one of the factors that had enabled China to bring about fast development, to improve its manufacturing, to attract firms into its region. But right now, under the chairmanship of Xi Jinping, the level of centralization of China seemed to have increased. There is some action there are instances of action that is taken up against the local officials who indulged in corruption. The local officials no longer want to indulge in corruption. And therefore, this is also one of the reasons why the level of growth in the Chinese economy has come down and there's a slowdown. So now compare this with India. In India, there are centralized small units, local urban government governing bodies and rural governing bodies, but they are not empowered. The allocation of public spending is very low. I told you 3%. And thirdly, even the units that are existing, that is the states, the officials in the states would have such a large geographical area to govern that it becomes difficult compared to what the particular deputy mayor in a particular municipality would have to control. I'm talking about the jurisdictions. There is competition between the states in India, but if it was between the local bodies, it would have been much better. And you've seen that example in China. So if it is the decentralized units that could bring about the favored firms, and bring about growth and make products for export to the world, the government had also done its part in ensuring that the Chinese exports are made cheap. And this they did in the 1990s, and they did this artificially in a certain way. So let me explain how that happened. This has got to do with meddling with the exchange rate of the China. So there is this domestic currency of China, there is this domestic currency, and there is this dollar. And how much a dollar costs in terms of domestic currency is the exchange rate. So generally, if a country actually exports more and has a trade surplus, it would normally ensure that this exchange rate would be such that it would have a high value, it wouldn't get devalued. Okay, let me just explain about why the exports become cheaper if the exchange rates are kept are stopped from being appreciated. So let me tell you what I mean by this. So firstly, you should know the fact that if the exports are cheaper, they become competitive around the world. So now how is this exports made cheaper in the international markets by the Chinese government? So there are these number of dollars in the Chinese exchange market, and there are also the Chinese domestic currencies. There are other currencies as well. Now, if the central bank of China takes away some dollars from this exchange market, the supply of dollars comes down, and therefore the value of dollar in terms of the domestic currency goes up. And because the value of dollar goes up, there is a certain consequence for people who are importing goods into China and for people who are exporting goods into China. And now, since we are talking about exports, since we are talking about cheaper exports, let me talk about the consequences that that the increase in the cost of dollar has on exports. So if there is a particular shirt, and if an exporter from China exports this shirt, and let us say this shirt costs 100 units in the domestic currency, and so let us say the exchange rate or the value of dollar in terms of domestic currency is $1, is at a rate of $1 is equal to 100 units. In other words, what I mean to also say is that the shirt also costs $1 because it costs 100 units in the domestic currency. If the exchange rate goes up, that means $1 would be, let us say, 200 units as opposed to 100 units. In such a case, the exporter who's trying to export the shirt would still make the shirt at 100 units, but because the exchange rate is $1 is equal to 200 units, he will be able to sell that shirt at $0.50. So you can really see what's happening here. The cost of export has come down, and this has made it much more competitive in the global world or in the international markets compared to other countries which have not ensured that the exchange rate can be fluctuated this way. So this effect where there is the exports have become cheaper because of artificial fluctuation of the exchange rate attracted a lot of firms to China. They were also attracted not only because of this, but also the infrastructure that was provided by the Chinese government. The Chinese took land from the Chinese people. They provided electricity and transportation facilities for the workers to move from the factories to their residence, for the goods to move from the factories to the market, and this infrastructure was also an attraction for these firms. Not only that, the Chinese government also ensured that the state-owned Chinese banks would reduce the interest rate so that the people who are borrowing, that is the businesses, would not have to pay back more than when the interest rates are high. So all these factors contributed to more and more firms coming into the China. It could be the domestic firms or it could be the international firms. It was a factor of attraction for the firms, all these factors. But these kind of methods used by China also had their downsides. For example, even before the downsides of the methods used by China, like preventing the appreciation of the exchange rate and a reduction in the interest rates, there is also one more factor that contributed to the firms finding it attractive. That one factor is controlling of the Workers' Union of China. What did this mean? This meant that the wages of the workers were kept low in comparison to the productivity of the work. Despite being of a good productivity, the wages of the workers would be kept low. And this they could do because the Chinese government had a control over the workers' union. And this meant that the firms would have a large profit margin with them, left with them after they have sold their goods, because they have to pay the workers. They're in any case going to pay low wages to the workers. So now let me just come back to what are the downsides of these methods used by China when it comes to appreciation, preventing the appreciation of the currency, or preventing the increase in the value of the Chinese currency. What this did is it would make the imports costly. I already told you that when it comes to exports, the exports become cheap. I told you how that happens. With regard to imports, what really happens is that if a shirt costed 100 units, and if someone is importing that shirt, they have to part with 100 units, and if the exchange rate is $1 is equal to 100 units, they have to part with $1. Now imagine that the exchange rate goes up to 200 units, that is $1 is equal to 200 units. Now they have to part with 200 units, and and then get in this shirt. So and they have to, if it is, let us say, let me tell you one more. So if it is $1 initially was 100 units, now the value of dollar has gone up, so therefore $1 is 200 units. So the people who are importing would have to part with 200 units to be able to get in that shirt. So the imports become costlier, and it would also discourage the imports, and the people who are buying these imports within China would also not buy the imports, and they would be diverted to buying the cheap Chinese domestically produced goods. So the imports had a disadvantage when it comes to the prevention of the appreciation of the Chinese currency. The second thing, when it comes to the reduction in the interest rates of the state-owned banks, it would be an advantage for people who are taking money or borrowing money, like the businesses, but not for the people who are depositing money, because they wouldn't get as much interest rate as they would if the interest rates were lowered compared to being higher. Not only that, the workers also lose out because they are not getting wages in line with the productivity. So what this has done is, the Chinese economy, within the Chinese economy domestically, the level of consumption in the Chinese economy has come down. Let me tell you one thing. In 2006, if you were to find out the figure for the percentage of consumption in the Chinese economy as a percentage of its GDP, it was 34%. And if you were to compare this with the economies that were equivalent to China, like South Korea and Thailand, this number was 50%, above 50%. When it came to India, it was 54%. When it came to US, a much richer country than China, it was 64%. So the level of consumption in the Chinese economy had come down, and this was the downside of some of the methods employed by the Chinese government. Now imagine what would happen if such methods were used in India. For example, imagine that the value of dollar is kept high, and then the rich Indians would find it difficult to go out to vacation. They would find it difficult to send their children for studies abroad, to colleges and schools. They would also find it difficult to buy imported goods because they would be more expensive. So there will be discontentment in the society. Not only that, if you were to take the case of the middle class Indians, people who deposit their monies in the banks, they wouldn't get a high interest rate back. And the workers' unions cannot be controlled, akin to what happened in China. There would be large-scale protests if the level of wage of the workers was not in line with the productivity. So there are some stark differences that helped ensure that the Chinese economy had developed fast, and especially its manufacturing had developed fast. And today in this video I brought about three main reasons. Some there could be many other reasons, but I brought out three reasons. One reason is the level of education in the rural areas in India right after independence and much later after independence was low. Second, the level of decentralization in the Indian economy is much low compared to China. 3%. The allocation of the public expenditure for the local government is 3% in India. In China, 51%. 3, it has got to do with other methods that Chinese government employed, like the prevention or the appreciation of the exchange rate, controlling the interest rates to favor firms, controlling the workers' union, and also providing good infrastructure for the firms to come in. So I hope you found this video about comparisons between why the comparisons of Chinese economy and Indian economy, and why manufacturing did not take off in India akin to that of China. I hope you found this video interesting. Thank you very much.